Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Williamsburg City Council meeting of Thursday, May 13th. Ms. Felica, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Thank you and welcome. First item on the agenda now is the public hearings. So first one is, and the only one, consideration and approval of the amended general license for William and Mary to add properties to the William and Mary Real Estate Foundation.
There we go.
Okay, there it
That
is.
should work.
There it is. So in 2011, City Council granted the College of William and Mary a license to run utility lines through public rights-of-way when they're going from a building owned by the university to another building owned by the university. Since then, William and Mary has used leases and the Real Estate Foundation to purchase properties that they use for the college's mission, and those are not contained in the general license. And so what ends up happening is they have to come to City Council for, I'll give you an example that we're facing right now. They want to run a fiber optic line from Tribe Square to the University Bookstore in the Triangle Building. And that's a property that's owned by the Real Estate Foundation. Part of it is leased by the university to another building that's being leased by the university. So this amends that general license to allow a broader scope for purposes of the license to allow the college to do that for properties that it leases and also to and from properties of the Real Estate Foundation. So it's basically a housekeeping measure to sort of reflect the reality of now in downtown. It doesn't grant any additional authority to do what they don't already have the authority to do. The other change is to clarify that this agreement is only for 40 years because the state code limits our ability to grant licenses. So it self-renews every 5 years, but that's capped at 40 years. And so the staff recommendation is that City Council grant this general license to the university.
Vice Mayor, any questions?
No questions, pretty straightforward.
Just one comment, remind everybody, we have an advantage with William and Mary actually purchasing real estate through the foundation because they continue to pay real estate taxes, correct?
Depends on the use of the building, but primarily yes.
Okay, thank you. Barb?
And the only question I had is I noticed it said that it'll be dated June 13th, 2021. So we'll approve it today and then it'll go into effect in a month. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
I have none.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll open the public hearing and allow anybody to come forward to speak to this matter. If you come forward, please state your name, address. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for further discussion. Okay, well, it seems, as Vice Mayor said, pretty straightforward. I think it's an opportunity to support the university in ways that ultimately benefit the community as well. So if there's a motion, I'd be happy to entertain it.
So I move that City Council approve the general license to the College of William and Mary dated June 13th, 2021.
Second.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Okay, that takes us to agenda number 4, reports, monthly financial statement. Cameron, you want to walk us through it?
Okay, good afternoon, and I'd like to start with the COVID performance update. Of course, the FY21 budget was based on a worst-case scenario, and the COVID-19 projection for April is based on what we anticipated cash flows to be as of year-to-date April. And then we have the actual column. And as you can see, we're performing very well in real estate tax, about $413,000 better than our projection. Personal property also came in better at $1.3 million. Lodging, however, came in below our expectation. There's a decrease of $570,000. I will note that year-to-date of April compared to year-to-date of April 20 is a 55% decrease. If I look at the month of April only, compared to April of 2020, there's a 78% increase. But if I compare April of 21 to April of 2019, it's a 36% decrease. Meals is also performing better than we anticipated. It's to the tune of $238,000. Again, if I compare April year-to-date to year-to-date last year, it's a 22% decrease. If I compare the month of April of 21 to the month of April in 20, we have a 101% increase. And if I compare April of 21 to April of 2019, it's a 4% decrease. Our business, professional, and occupation license are performing better than our worst-case projection by $448,000. Our sales tax for education is performing better, a positive variance of $519,000. The CARES offset here is the amount of revenue that I've allowed to stay in there because I have offsetting expenses to match that. So that's $2.3 million, and of course we did not budget for that. Other revenues are performing better by $406,000. Our total revenues have a positive variance of about $5.1 million compared to our worst case projection. Our total expenditures are coming under budget, or what we expected budget expenditures to be at this point in time, by $372,000. That gives us a total positive variance of $5.4 million. That's compared to the anticipated of 10.9, which is higher than what we had anticipated for the year. And that's because we've not yet received our second half real estate taxes, which will be due June 5th. So that means that that still leaves a $5.4 million draw based on projections. Is my current projections updated? Right now would anticipate a deficit of about $3.4 million. And that's if we didn't have the transfers that we anticipate from the tourism as well as the COVID contingency we created in the CIP plan. Just a couple of other notes related to the budget. The Capital Improvement Project Fund, the sales tax year to date is about 19% lower than the previous year. Receipts for the month of April, which reflect February activity, were about 5% less than FY20, which is still better than the 20% that we had been experiencing throughout the year. If I compare to April of 2019, it's a 22% decrease. In the Tourism Fund, sales tax year to date is about 22% less than FY20. Again, if I compare April receipts to April of FY20, it's about an 8% decrease. And if I compare to 2019, it's about a 4% decrease. The $2 lodging tax is 45% less compared to FY20. April receipts increased 62% compared to FY20, but are still 42% decrease compared to April of FY19. And in our utility fund, we see that revenue, water revenue decreased 16% compared to FY20. Our consumption decreased overall 9%. That's composed of a 12% decrease in commercial offset by residential remaining relatively level. The decrease in consumption accounts for about a $357,000 of the $494,000 decrease in the revenue, or 72%. And the remaining 22% decrease is related to delinquent balances and also some timing differences in when those bills go out. And sewer revenue decreased 6% compared to FY20. Consumption decreased overall 1.3%, and that's comprised of a decrease of 5.3% related to commercial, with an increase in residential of 4.4%. And again, if you want to compare month to month, we see that commercial water consumption increased for the month of April about 72% compared to April of FY20. However, April of FY21 consumption was about 14% less compared to April of 2019. And on the sewer side, sewer consumption increased in April about 62% compared to FY20, but was about level with April of FY19. That concludes my report. I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Questions?
So, thank you, Ms. Dameron, and I know, say this every month, but this really is helpful to see this on a month-to-month basis. I don't have any questions, but again, we've repeated this again monthly. It's good to see that we're performing in a lot of areas better than the worst-case scenario. Although it's not all good news, there's some good news there. And I know at least in the last couple of weeks, in speaking to some restaurants, that they're in the last few weeks, as restrictions for COVID are lifted, that they're starting to see some record numbers in the restaurants. So hopefully that's another positive indication that we're on the rebound. So thank you for the report.
Yeah, thanks for the report. Yeah, looking for some optimism in terms of the monthly trends, especially this past weekend. I was seeing, restaurants with, waiting time for over an hour to get a table. So I think things are picking up. I reached out to the Hotel Motel Association to see what are they seeing most recently. Their occupancy rate for the general Williamsburg area was 44.3%. And it seems like the average daily rate is going up. It was $114.21, with the revenue per available room at $50.64. And Doug, is that a $50.64 of revenue per available room? How does that seem in perspective?
Well, it's still down, because obviously, you take your total revenue and divide it by all the inventory to figure out what the RevPAR is. And since occupancy is still low, RevPAR numbers are lower. But, they should be much higher in a normal circumstance.
Right.
But Williamsburg hadn't seen normal in many years.
The other thing Ron was saying that they're seeing an increase in families with children traveling to Williamsburg, semi-retired couples and young couples. What's lagging is the business traveler, the lack of conference and meetings. And the Motel Hotel Association had their first podcast, their pilot, yesterday, and I'll send the link to Economic Development, because I think it would be good to send out to us where they were actually giving the figures and giving what they're seeing firsthand. And I think they're going to be doing that on a regular basis, which, again, get some people in terms of speakers to interview to get what is the flavor there. But thank you.
Thank you for the update, as always. I did have a couple questions and comments. So one, you commented about the personal property tax being up compared to the worst case scenario, and it's up significantly. Can you address some reasons as to why you think that might be the case?
Well, I think one of the things that we did, we never changed both of personal property and real estate, the assessments. What our concern was back last March when we were drafting this budget before vaccines were out, et cetera, was that while the assessment may stay level, people may not have the wherewithal to pay their bills, and of course, typically, we eventually collect just about all of the real estate and personal property, but I have a 60-day window that I can collect delinquent receipts and report them and use them to pay the bills of June 30th. And so we were lowering our projection based on ability to pay, basically. And so people have come through and they've paid their tax bills, and it wasn't near as, fortunately, as bad of a situation as it could have been.
Good, and I think that's also reflected in the variance to the projection of 5.4 million, but we still have to remember that when you say 3 million deficit, that's what you're projecting for at the end of FY '21.
Right, currently. And of course, I update that every month as I get more information in. So that could get better, but I don't think that it will get better to the point that we're not drawing from reserves, or if we don't draw from reserves, it will be because of the transfers that we had paid for from tourism, or planned for from tourism and the CIP fund.
So even though we have a positive variance, we are still going to have a negative bottom line.
Correct.
And you mentioned about the meals taxes really rebounding to about 4% less than in 2019.
Right.
And I think we're using revenue from meals close to 2019 for our FY22
Yes.
projections.
Very close to it, we are.
Okay, and for lodging, where do we, if you can remind me as to where we fit for the lodging projections for FY22 compared to FY19?
If I, and we did many different budget variations, but I believe we landed around 2.2 to 2.3 million. And as you can see, we had 2.3 is our worst case, and we're projecting about 1.5, and we're well below that right now. So I think with lodging, we felt that might be a little slower to return than we did with the meals. I think my earlier projection in the FY22 budget was around 1.6 or 1.7, and so we did increase that about $500,000.
And I'm glad to see that both of them are improving, and to Councilman Maslin's comment about hour-long wait, I think that has two components to it, from what I've heard from different individuals. One is that there are more people in town eating out, but there are also, the restaurants are without staff to the extent that they need to take care of all of their customers. I know that one restaurant that's not typically closed on Monday is now closed on Monday night because of staffing, different ones throughout the community, and I would imagine that that's going to impact the hotel motel operations as well. So even if people are here and we don't have staffing, that can be a detriment. And there was one other thing. Oh, and could you remind us about the CARES money? I think, when we see it as a positive, that sometimes we need a reminder that there were restrictions as to how
Right.
that money could be used, and perhaps give us a few examples of how the city used that funding.
Sure. We could not replace lost revenue with that money. We used that fund, I think we gave about $287,000 to the schools for their use in addressing COVID. We also, we used it for some grants to the community. We also used it to cover some of our costs of protecting not only our employees, but the public in the way that we served the public, and particularly during the period that we were closed in teleworking, to provide for the technology to do that, as well as some of the barriers that we have up to to protect people, basically, as well as hand sanitizers, all of the supplies. I think I have a list over here.
Yeah.
It was pretty exhaustive. We also used some of that to reimburse for some of the public safety salaries, particularly as more was required.
Because it could be used for public safety, correct?
It could be used for public safety, that is correct.
And I think you had mentioned that the money that was was assigned to the schools was to match what James City County
Correct.
had
We also
done.
had some programs through, human services for assisting low-income individuals, particularly with housing. Also, food distribution during some of the most critical times that we experienced.
All right. I just wanted to just sort of clarify that, because sometimes when you see that big number, it's hard to sort of say, well, what was it used with, when not knowing all of the restrictions and the timeline. So that's all the questions I had. Thank you very much.
Thanks as always, Director Damon, for this report. I want to ask one question about the lodging number, which is coming in below, as it has been, the level that was projected. I've been trying to, over the last few months, though, create a sort of mental line graph of how it is getting closer on a month-to-month basis from where you all might have first put it. And I saw from the last update for March, it was about $30,000 more, which seems to me to be less than it has been in previous months. So could you speak towards how the lodging revenue is coming in on a monthly basis, and if that is trending in the the right direction, that there are more people
Well,
visiting?
I really, and if you'll look, there's a page that shows some of the room tax revenue, and you can see that really April is the first time that we really see an increase there. So it's really early yet to say we have a good trend line on the lodging, although it is very exciting to see that at least for April compared to April of 20, which would reflect March activity, is showing some signs of increase. I think the thing, and one of the reasons we felt like this would be the slowest to return, and I'll go back to my predecessor, Phil, was coming across one of the charts that he had started earlier that shows, I think going back to probably the 90s, early 2000, lodging and meals tax combined exceeded our real estate revenue by quite a bit, actually. And gradually, from that time period down to 2012, slowly real estate started to be stronger, and to that line transverse, where real estate, we're more dependent on the real estate than we were lodging and meals. And what I have observed is meals continues to, or at least pre-COVID, continued to grow and is rebounding a little bit better. However, over the past several years, lodging has either declined or minimal, but stayed pretty much level. And so that concerns me a little bit when we start trying to project just how fast and how much we might see. Not saying we won't, but I am saying that it is concerning.
Right. Well, thank you. Those are all the questions I have.
But and just to follow up on that, we'll probably in no time soon see lodging revenues come into what we saw in the 90s. If for no other reasons, the inventory is much less today. We're at roughly half of the hotel rooms in the city than we had back in the day. So we won't see those numbers come back, but it would be nice to see them trend up for lots of reasons. Just enhancement in product alone would be good, but the revenues to the city would be great. Well, I appreciate you outlining and being more detailed on how the numbers are coming in and how they reflect to previous years, because I think that's important information. Just in following up on all of the comments, I think labor is going to be the biggest challenge this year. I estimate there's probably over 4,000 available job positions just in the service industry today. Speaking to some of our larger and small property managers and owners, everybody is grappling for help, and that's suppressing our demand, which is going to suppress our revenue. So that's a concern. So if anybody has any young people in their house and need a job, there's plenty of them available. So let's get them to work. Thank you, Ms. Dameron. Okay, so that takes us now to monthly departmental operating reports. Anything there, Mr. Trivett?
No, thank you, Mayor. Just submitted for your review.
Any questions for staff?
No questions.
City manager report, Mr. Trivett?
None this month.
Anything from our attorney?
Nothing today.
All right, so that takes us to the open forum. I do have some speakers cards. I'm going to call them at random. It's an opportunity to talk about anything that's on the agenda today or anything that's on your mind. As I call your name, please come forward and state your name and address, and please keep your comments to 5 minutes. So with that, I'll begin with Rick Overy. Always a pleasure to see the chair of the EDA with us. Thank you.
Members of council, several of you have said that you are not finance people. I'm a financial person by education and by profession. I attended the budget retreat, studied the city manager's report very carefully, and I had a series of discussions with the finance director and real estate assessor. After careful consideration, I rise to ask you to delay the vote on the budget for several reasons. I want to talk to you about the timing and the budget facts about this tax increase. First, this is the wrong time, perhaps the worst time to implement a tax increase of more than 10% on our business and private property owners. We're still wearing masks under an emergency order from the governor, and you haven't been in these chambers for almost a year. We're still in a crisis, and our hospitality businesses are reeling from the effects of the worst season ever when our hotels and restaurants were closed during their peak season last summer. You know as well as I do the effects on our city, but my point is that we have not recovered, as you just heard. Now is not the time to raise property taxes on individuals and business owners. Every economist admits that slow growth, and in this case, are recovering. Last year's budget projections were way too dire, so you ended up taking only about $500,000 from a reserve of $12 million in the so-called rainy day fund. This year's estimate is at least $5 million too conservative, as we just learned from the finance director. If this is not a rainy day, indeed a hurricane, then I don't understand what we're saving. Our bond rating is not in danger. Our reserve and our city services are not in any danger. So you can debate whether you want tax increases to provide future services. But let me be clear. The reason for this tax increase is not because of the pandemic. The city manager said the reason for this tax increase is to rebuild our war chest, his words, for future projects. That decision should be made after it is clear we're on the road to recovery. Even the federal government, who is hemorrhaging money and has and will again infuse vast sums of money in our city, will wait to increase taxes because the fact that a tax increase slows growth and delays recovery is understood on both sides of the aisle. Second, although you talk about 6 cents or 8 cents for this tax increase because it sounds trivial, this was proposed as a 13% tax increase and is now proposed as a 10% tax increase, which is a huge tax increase even if we're not in the middle of a crisis. On top of a tourism tax increase that our restaurant owners are struggling with, and it's on top of increased assessments on real estate that will already go up, as will the values on vehicle taxes. So, on council, only our mayor is in the hospitality industry, but if you are a restaurant or a hotel or B&B owner, you will face increased taxes on your building and your vehicles on top of a 2% tax on your product last year. Now is not the time for another 10% tax increase, especially all at once. The third reason the timing is wrong is because your city manager has admitted you do not have all the facts to make a decision. Since last month, there has been a $10 million change in the assumptions because of the new information about anticipated revenue that will come from the federal government. Your city manager also said on Tuesday that tax increase is not about next year's budget. It's about future projections, which may or may not be accurate. So why would you not wait until your June meeting when there will be more clarity, particularly on local tax revenue figures and hopefully on the size of the infusions from the state and federal government? explains the purpose of this 10% tax increase when it was presented and explained in the city manager's letter to citizens. Fully 6 of the 8 cents, or 75%, is to replenish the reserve for future capital spending projects. In fact, as presented, most of this tax increase is to prepay for possible elementary school construction in 2027. So you're asking business owners and retired homeowners to bear a tax increase now for future school buildings for kids who may not yet be born. I think that is unwise and unfair. As presented on Monday, the items that will not make next year's budget include a fishing pier, a softball field, and sidewalks. Those may be desirable, but they do not justify a 10% increase in the middle of a crisis. I'm not opposed to considering a tax increase in the long run. My neighbor who spoke on Monday argued that we can afford it. But even we agree that a tax increase of this size should be phased in over time, perhaps 1 cent a year for 6 years. And certainly not all at once at the tail end of the crisis. So as a finance person, as a businessman, I strongly oppose the tax increase at this inopportune time. To do so at this time would be to make a premature decision with incomplete facts and erroneous assumptions at a time when our business and property owners are still reeling from the effects of the largest economic crisis in a century. I own one property in town, my house, and I'm very fortunate to be able to pay such an increase. So this is not about me not wanting to pay my fair share. It's about an ill-conceived and poorly timed decision that will hurt our businesses and property owners, our recovery from the pandemic, and therefore every citizen and employee in the city. You have been told we cannot go forward without a tax increase. I think it will impede the progress that we've worked hard together to achieve. I apologize, I cannot stay for your deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Overy. My condolences. Next speaker's card is Johnny Bender.
Microphone on.
Yeah, it's on.
Thank you, City Council. I'm Johnny Bender. I've only been living in Williamsburg for 1 year, so admittedly, I don't yet know the ins and outs of the city. I'm building my business back up, teaching private music lessons and writing software. I have been visiting colonial Williamsburg consistently since I was a child. The city is run well and has the nicest architecture in the world, in my opinion. I've heard you are considering a tax increase. I'm not in your position. I do not see all that you see. What I can say is that as a student of history and economics and as an entrepreneur, the laws of economics are immutable. They are as sure as predictable as the laws of gravity. With this in mind, certain tax burdens and fees act as artificial price controls above market rates, which inevitably cause simultaneous shortages and excess demand and always lead to neighborhood flight. We see this everywhere. Real estate prices are high, yet there is more empty residential and commercial real estate than ever before. And it's not because people don't want to do business. Government supports on force here and sugar have created a nation of citizens addicted to sweets and in need of free healthcare. With every price control, there is always, by law, an economic squeeze somewhere, though it may not immediately be seen. Right now, the nation is printing trillions of dollars in new money, resulting in massive inflation. The temptation is to do what all the other cities are doing, and that is to increase revenues. However, a government that tries to solve everyone's problems will inevitably end up with a citizenry who cannot solve any of their own problems. I'm asking the City Council to reflect on a hard question. Is the local government asking for an increase in revenue in order to provide services that are, by their nature, outside the realm of the private marketplace? It is easy to say, all the other cities are doing it, Uncle Sam is essentially providing universal basic income, and we want some of that inflow. On the other hand, what makes a leader is to do the hard thing, to be the salmon swimming upstream, and say austerity is the measure of the day. When every other city in the country is taxing and spending right into perhaps the second fall of Rome, there can be one city shining on a hill that stands tall when the dominoes fall. Because that city said we will lower taxes and teach our citizens
Thank you, Mr. Bender. Next speaker's card is Michael Davis. Well, I'm not dressed. You're still welcome. Always 5-0. Nobody ever found those 5 to vote against. Whoever is sitting in this chair, I don't know how long you've been voted against them. I moved here in August. I couldn't pay cash for my house. I didn't because, well, 3% interest rates just kind of a no-brainer. I'm 31 years old. I'm going to law school because I love the United States of America. This country is not great. Not great because of anything that the government of this city has done or ever will do. I paid $25,000 more for my house exclusively because the property tax was less. You want people to come here? You don't raise it. Fiscal management is you cut your budget. I do not mean this in any way harsh. I know people work. I guarantee you I can get this budget to match. There would be some unhappy people. Life isn't fair. And the end result will be greater. The word tax, by definition, is a burden. I'm best like this because I spent the last 7 hours chopping firewood by hand because I refuse to spend the $100 to rent one for a day and not be gone. So, I don't want to take 21 hours of firewood chopping to give to a city that is building a dock at a park that we already paid to use, that was able to reduce $900,000 without batting an eye. That as I asked progressive and detailed questions in my email to Mr. Trevette, more and more it came to clarity that this is not necessary. And finally, I know how city budgets work. I'm done. When you are that person over your budget, they say, hey, can we get this? No, well, the worst we can do is ask for it. So the argument of a $3.5 million budget increase is not sustainable. We are here to be the great city that you are. I moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, exclusively for my family. We plan on staying here. I've got a 2-year-old and I've got a 1-year-old. I will be an entrepreneur in the future. If you want to hurt entrepreneurs, which is your jobs, which is your revenue, increase taxes. If you want to detriment your entire future and be like everyone else, blasé and non-attractive, then implement this tax increase. But if you want to stand for liberty and justice for all, it's our money. It is not yours. It is not yours. Do not confirm all of it is. I recognize this is a Republican government. We're not a true democracy. We're a democratic republic that stands for this city. I will respect and sustain your decision, no matter what it is. But do not forget the foundation that has enabled that wood to be cut, to be bent, and to be placed in front of you. Because somewhere along the line, it's a 30-year-old, 1-year-old dude, or an 18-year-old girl, or a 63-year-old person who's worked their tail end off. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Next speaker's card I have is Laura Overy.
Good
Welcome, sir.
afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Mayor Pons, Vice Mayor Dent, and members of City Council. I come to speak to you today as the Commissioner of the Revenue, not as, I am a citizen, obviously, of the city, But I just wanted to present a few facts for your consideration as you're considering the budget increase. It is my job to remain partisan and not to be involved in the discussion on whether or not tax rates are raised or lowered. It's my job to implement fair and equal taxation to all citizens based on the rates that you all set. But I just wanted to give you just a couple pieces of information that you may not be aware of. After the last city council meeting, I was under the impression that the decision to pass the budget would be delayed until June. And so we've been working really hard in our office to make sure that we could provide updated property tax projections for you. Normally that information is gathered and prepared in August, and we have pushed really hard this last 2 months to get all of the assessments in for all of the vehicles, as well as for all of the business property taxes. And we are working through the alphabet. We're on the letter W, so we are very, very close to having those numbers, and we feel like we can give you much better projections on where we're going to land with the property value rate. So I just wanted you to have that information as you make your decision about whether or not to move forward. I do believe that the projection is still a little bit conservative based on what I've seen thus far. And I thought we were going to have a little bit more time to get you that information. So I was a little bit pressed. I wasn't even going to speak today, but I was a little bit pressed when finding out that you might consider the vote today. So I wanted to give you that information. The other thing that I was not aware of, I knew that you all were considering a cigarette tax increase, which our office does administer, and when I realized that you all were considering that a few months ago, I did make a request that if you decided to pass that rate, that you just delay the implementation of it by a few months, because we have to order stamps, we have to contact the suppliers, we have to get all the stamps returned, we have to do additional assessments, and we can't possibly get that done in 6 weeks, and I don't want to be not compliant with the city code, and I want to make sure that we implement it correctly and that I follow the letter of the law. So I would ask that as you consider that particular rate increase, that you postpone the implementation of it to, at a minimum, October 1. Ideally, it would be January 1. The last thing to let you know is we have an inventory of about 400,000 stamps, about $5,000 worth of stamps that we will have to dispose of. So if we wait a few months to implement this, we can save a little bit of money by not having to order the new stamps now and use the inventory that we have on hand. The last thing, I think this might have been mentioned at the initial budget meeting maybe 2 months ago, but I just wanted to mention it again. Across the state of Virginia, the NADA values on vehicles are averaging somewhere in the range of 10 to 18% higher than the previous year because manufacturing shut down and not as many new vehicles were produced in the past year, so the value on used vehicles has actually gone up significantly. And again, we will have that final projection hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But I've already seen where our assessment values have increased significantly. So that is going to provide an additional tax burden for the citizens. The last thing about that is the city provides a tax relief based on Governor Gilmore's car tax relief. And last year, that rate was about 51%. And because of the higher assessments, the rate this year, I believe, is being requested to set at 38%. So that's an additional tax increase because citizens are not going to receive as much of a discount as they have in the past. So just some facts that I thought I would put out there for you, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you coming forward, sharing that. Next speaker's card I have is Sabrina Fairbanks.
Good afternoon, Council. Sabrina Fairbanks, 119 Berkeley Lane is my residence, and 201 Carey Street is a rental property. I wanted to come today and let you know that myself and everybody that I know in the city, almost exclusively, is not in favor of you raising the property taxes. I'm not a financial expert like Mr. Overy, but I agreed with everything he said. Some of the numbers that I came up with were that this increase would be about 12% with the 8 cents, but that when you added in the assessment increase, it could go up into the 20s. So, given that, I also wanted to request that council defer any vote on this and the adoption of the budget until you have all the information that you need, like the COVID assistance money. And I don't know that you have that. I wasn't sure if that was the same CARES money or if this is a windfall that could be coming in and you may not need to raise the taxes. And I'll close with just telling you, looking at your budget online with a personal story, when my children were in elementary school, one of my children, which Mr. Rogers knows, said, at that time, I prepared custody evaluations for the courts and I had the rental properties. And he said to me one day, if you could clean more houses and type more, I could buy what I want right now instead of having to wait till Christmas or my birthday. And so that is the first time I remember having to talk to my kids about wants versus needs. And coming out of a pandemic, I think it might be important, and this delay may give the department some time to go back and look at what do we really need right now, rather than what do we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fairbanks. The last speaker card I have is Mr. David Cranbill. Dr. Cranbill? David?
Council members for being there. And thank goodness we now can speak out because we really hear the community. That's clear as a bell here today. And it's healthy and good. As you know, well, let me start from based on these comments. I certainly agree with Ms. Overy. I'm sure you do too. I mean, all the ideas about the cigarette tax make common sense, and she knows more than anybody probably, so, or certainly a huge amount, so that all makes sense, and I appreciate her bringing those comments to your attention. Several people have said we should wait for more information. If I were in your shoes, that's hard to ignore. I'm not sure what new information will be. It could say that it's going nowhere. I certainly think the future for lodging taxes is very bleak. But I feel the pressure that must be on you for a delay. Personally, let me stress that I own a house that's over $500,000 in value based on the city, probably can sell it for even more. And I've lived here 50 years. I've invested in a rental property, which is doing very well. It's clearly well over $500,000 in value for resale. And I'm significantly invested in a business on the Duke of Gloucester. And I'm very much invested in investments, degrees that qualify me, I think, for numerical analysis. And my simple conclusions are that I look forward, well, I totally support this community and have always, and I totally support this city manager who's clearly at the top of anybody we've ever had and always interests in our well-being, less so his well-being, which is critical for anybody that we have working for us. I think he's thought this through very carefully and very wisely, and I think all of his analysis will prove to be valid and that more money is needed. And I think the $3 million estimate is probably pretty close to what our deficit will be. Now, we can deal with the various economic theories depending upon practically or functionally or political thinking, and so forth and so on. But personally, I like to operate without a deficit. And this city, in my 50 years here, has always worked hard to operate without a deficit. So you're going to be faced with, whether it's in June or July or whatever, or going forward, with what are you going to cut or where are you going to raise money? Whether this vote comes in June, seems like it's inevitable because it's important to listen to everybody. But I'm totally against operating with a deficit. I believe that those of us who own homes, as you heard before, that are of a value of $500,000 and up, are not paying our fair share. We've been financed, we've had very low real estate taxes because as wasn't quite said this way, because we've allowed tourism to fund the city's costs. And now the tourist industry is hit and is changing drastically. Business travel, business lodging, all these aspects, meals that are expense accounts, it's all different going forward. So what are we going to do to operate without a deficit? In my opinion, those of us with expensive homes aren't paying our fair share, and that's based on national norms, state norms, and even regional norms from James City County and York County. Now, how we raise it, that's a personal question. I did have a nice talk with my neighbor, and at one point we actually agreed on breaking it up into 2 or 3 years. But the point would be that you would pass it so we don't go through this discussion. If you're not going to increase it to 6 or 8% or whatever in 1 year, and you vote for it over 2 years, then I would like to see it legislated that that's going to happen so our city manager can plan accordingly. Personally, I think this is a group that can afford it. Now, in terms of businesses, I'm in a business. We're just barely there and have been for months. But the city has used taxes to help us. So there's no reason that we can't deal with its impact on individual businesses just as we do now with all kinds of problems. And finally, I'll point out that if you want workers to come here, you need an environment for them, not as well as people who come here retired. And those people, I went to ACE, spent $15, I paid a dollar extra tax. I went to Sal's, had a pizza, $16, I paid a $2 tax. That tax has no impact on me, 0. But anybody making between $25,000 and $75,000 who's working in this community, it's every dollar counts. And to the extent we've built into, unfortunately, not the city's fault, into our very aggressive tourist fund, revenue, a sales tax. Well, if we're going to worry about taxes and so forth, that's going to be a big question coming forward. So I only say, rather than deal with that and whatever, let's think positively of how we cover the deficit, and I urge you to raise the tax and tax the structures that can afford it. It's that simple. And I only say, I saw mentors like the Gonzales and the Hornsbys and lots of other people like the Darlings and whatever who are my
Dr.
mentors.
Kramer, if you can wrap it up, you're over the 5 minutes.
Okay, and so, well, the point is, they would support that regardless of what are your political views and economic views are. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Say one thing I forgot. I know a number of people.
Sir, if I could, I'm going to call to see if there's anybody else who'd like to come forward, and then after that, I'll let you come back up to the microphone. Is there anybody else who'd like to come forward to speak at this moment? The Honorable Shohan. Welcome, sir.
Good day, members of City Council, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and staff. Good representation of the whole entire city team. Thank you for what you do in your service, first of all. I'm Mickey Chohan. I live at 129 Berkeley Lane, the house I was born in many, many years ago, and I'm a business owner and also one of the representatives of the Williamsburg Area Restaurant Association, and try to keep up with some of the legislative matters that are concerning to the Restaurant Association. So to try to consolidate and make this a briefer statement, Rick Overy really had done a masterful job in his presentation with facts and figures. I'm sorry I don't have all the same facts and figures he might have. The restaurant industry is a different world these days. And I probably, in the city, probably know more about the restaurant industry than most because I've been in it such a long time, celebrating 35 years. So, but from all my colleagues in the industry that are Williamsburg restaurant operators, we're all struggling. Councilwoman Ramsey hit the nail on the head with the levels of service, and Mayor, you yourself are acutely aware of service levels. Right now, at just our restaurant location in Williamsburg, we are in the high six-figure number behind sales of last year. It's unbelievable, the stress. So it's a drowning feeling that restaurateurs have. I know the hoteliers are going through the same struggles. It's this drowning feeling, and the help we get is a brick. And that's not what we need right now. That was why Rick Overy's comments were so on target and on point. Now's not the time to do this. So I would urge you to pump the brakes a little bit, take a look at this closely and carefully, and see what we can do to make us get by. I've had the privilege of sitting in your position before on city council, and I know it's an important decision that you make because it's going to impact many. But in the restaurant sector, I can tell you, there's nothing that would really be more damaging than adding another burden to what we already have. I could have filled the room today with my fellow restaurateurs, but I come as one voice. And frankly, I couldn't get them here anyway because they're trying to keep their businesses afloat. And it's a struggle for me to even come here today because I've got so many obligations. But anyhow, I thought this was an important time to have my voice be heard on behalf of the Restaurant Association as well. Thank you again for what you do.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming forward. Would anybody else like to come forward? Mr. Davis, if you'd like.
I apologize. I didn't realize you guys were potentially voting on it till the comments, but I know everyone that I've talked to doesn't think the vote's happening today because you guys told everyone last time it wasn't till June. So lots of people would have come who didn't come because they don't know you're contemplating voting it today.
Thank you, sir. Okay. If there's nobody else, I'll close the open forum and move forward with discussion. Takes us now to unfinished business, and it's the consideration and approval of Resolution 21-07 adopting the budget for fiscal year FY22. So obviously we've gotten lots of comments today, and I'll speak briefly to the notion of when we're going to vote for it. I know in April we did talk about allowing for the opportunity for an in-person meeting in May, which we are at. That was our first and foremost priority. And if there was still consensus amongst council that a vote could be had, we could do that. But we did suggest that we could hold off till June. I don't think anybody's opposed to that. I think there's some rationale for moving forward. If that be the will of council, and certainly could support that. As I think there was a lot of good comments, and I'll just say, as a business person in town, I haven't been in town as long as Mr. Showan, but close. Been a long time, but I own property in town. The tax burden on me is going to be in the thousands of dollars if we vote to raise this tax, and I don't take that lightly, and I know that there's people out there struggling. But I think what's been proposed in this budget helps make Williamsburg continue to be a strong, viable place. And making investments in our community, whether it's boat docks or paving, is absolutely essential to helping Williamsburg maintain its viability and its future. It's what brings people to town. It's what brings people here to live. That level of service that we provide. So I'll reserve some of my comments on some of the ins and outs of the budget, but I'll give my colleagues the opportunity to weigh in. So with that, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Tribbett, I don't know, this question is for you or Mr. Ameren, but actually I just mentioned to the mayor prior to the meeting that I had read an article from a media outlet in Northern Virginia that talked about, as Ms. Overy referred to, NADA significantly increasing the assessment on used vehicles. Was that figured into when you came back with the increased revenue projections from our previous meeting? Or
Yes, Mr. Ameren talked to Ms. Overy. They adjusted the projections based on that conversation.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that because I hadn't heard the 10 to 18%, but I had just read this article that it was going to more than likely increase property taxes because of all those impacts on used vehicles.
Would you mind if I ask just a follow-up question? to
Yeah,
that?
no.
Do you have an estimate of what that dollar, I mean, if it's 10%, what would that dollar amount be on increased in personal property tax on vehicles? Is it-
I have the amount that I went through with Ms. Overy earlier in
Right.
the projection of this. And based on that, I increased the personal property tax by $99,200. I did have a slight decrease, about $50,000 in the business personal property, based on that conversation.
So even
at
if it
that
comes in
time.
a little bit higher, we're not talking millions of dollars, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, for allowing me to jump in on that.
So that's all the questions I had. To comment, first of all, and I say this whenever we have important issues like this, and the public is reaching out to us through phone calls or emails, or thank all of you for being here today. As Dr. Cranfield referred to, it's all healthy conversation, and it is your community, so it's important that we hear feedback from you. And we all take that into consideration, and it really is impactful as we go through the decision-making process. The other thing I'd like to say up front is I'm committed to restoring the city's financial health and moving all of our projects forward to make Williamsburg the place that it is, and the special place that it is, and the reason that, we're all here. But with that being said, right now, as has been said today and in several emails that have been sent to us, I just don't believe that right now is the time to impose another financial burden on the folks in our community that are struggling. And I said at the last meeting, so for those of you that are hearing it again, I'm not bragging, but I'm blessed that for me, fortunately, I haven't faced the financial crisis that others have. But I have empathy for those people that have. I have friends that have lost jobs. Their spouses have lost jobs. They're struggling with, their kids being at home and trying to get them through school. So it limits their ability to go out and try to find work. So all of those things together, I just think this tax increase places an additional burden on the community. As Mr. Chauhan has stated, businesses out there are suffering. I don't want to contribute to anybody in this community that has a drowning feeling, and we're adding to that. And then in the last, we've seen the cost of goods and services go up. If anybody's gone out to buy lumber, a 2x4 is $7. And now we have this gas crisis. And though the shortage may be short-lived, we were already seeing the price of gasoline increase before we hit this shortage due to the pipeline being shut down. Then we find, again, I just happened to see this article yesterday from Northern Virginia that talked about personal property. So there, though it may not be huge, for those that are struggling, it's another increase and adds to their financial burden. I haven't been in the city as long as a lot of people that are in this room or the people in this community. But since coming to Williamsburg, this is my home as well. Again, I'm committed to making Williamsburg the best it can be. And, though we've talked about the city's lost some revenue, I can look at the positive side of it as far as the city is concerned. We've been fortunate that we haven't had to lay any employees off, and no employees their hours have been cut back. So while we face some revenue shortfalls, there's some positive sides that we've been able to experience as we've gone through this pandemic. And, the city manager came up with a plan, and people were able to work from home but still provide the services to meet the needs of the community. So all of those are some positive things that have come out of this. And I know, we've looked at this, we've kind of beat this budget to death, but it's important that we do that. And Mr. Trivett in his, I mentioned a few meetings ago about supporting a 4-cent tax increase because he showed some slides, correct me if I'm wrong, that a 4 cent would get us through, would have a balanced budget for FY '22. That's what I believe is important at this time, is that we get through the next budget year, allow the city some opportunity to recover, but more importantly, allow our community the opportunity to recover. Those that are in financial crisis don't have the resources that the city has, and I don't feel like we need to impose any additional financial burden on our community. And it's been said here today, and we've had several emails and over today, and I had several people contact me last night that the mayor's already spoken to, is delaying the vote until June. We have the opportunity to look at, maybe we may not know, as Mr. Trivett stated on Monday, we may not know in June what the funds are that we're going to get in the American Recovery Plan, but at least give us that 30 days to see what we might be receiving in federal funds, and we have a better opportunity to see how that impacts our budget. And again, the mayor's mentioned this as well. We talked about it, voting in June to allow people the opportunity to come and speak in person because we've been virtual. We're in May. I still think there's people out there that are hesitant to come, even though some of the restrictions have been lifted, that people are still hesitant to come out in public and speak, hence the reason we've received a lot of emails. But I would like us to consider delaying that until June to allow more people the opportunity to feel comfortable and come and speak to us about their concerns on the budget. And the other thing I would like to say is it's from the beginning, I've never said that I didn't support a tax increase, because a tax increase is obvious by the numbers that Ms. Dameron and Mr. Trivett have presented. A 4 cent tax increase, again, gets us through a balanced budget for the next fiscal year. And I support a more gradual approach to recovery to allow our community to recover before we place an additional burden on them. So that's my thoughts right now, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Mr. Maslin?
So we've talked about some of the barriers to recovery, especially in the restaurants and hotels, and additional expenses being one of them, and staffing another one. And I've reached out to the Chamber of Commerce to sort of give them some ideas. How can we sort of pull together as a community and see if we can get a better labor pool there, and look forward to maybe talking to the Restaurant Association too. So last month in our meeting, in our City Council meeting, we all agreed to postpone the budget vote until June for several reasons. It allows more opportunities for in-person public comment, which we've seen beginning today. It also allows more time for council members to consider these comments. Having to vote after just hearing these comments, within the last hour is ridiculous. It also allows us another month's worth of trending information, which we've talked about here, and more time to understand what federal funds may come to the city, and what restrictions there would be for actually spending those. I think two things should be noted. Some of the possible projections we're hearing for federal funds equal more than 10 years of the 6 cents tax increase. 10 years of tax increase could be coming from the federal government. And we need time as a city council to understand what are our priorities and how would we use those funds. The other thing is, I've not seen any jurisdictions in our area that have increased their real estate tax rates. In fact, several of them are decreasing them. So why are we different? Why is it that we have to get more money out of the real estate tax rates and everybody else doesn't? So I think giving us another month to actually have better discussions and more thoughtful discussions, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Ramsey?
Thank you. So I've made a lot of little notes here, and hopefully be able to follow them. So Ms. Dameron, when you were going through the meals tax today and looking at April compared to sort of the projection. I had down that actual April of this year is 4% decrease from April of 2019. Was that correct?
That is correct.
And what was it relative to April a year ago?
So the meals tax compared to April of 20 increased 101%.
Okay, so I thought I remembered you said we had a huge increase in the meals tax from a year ago compared to...
To 21, and
Okay.
then a 4% decrease compared to 19.
2019, which was, from what I understand, sort of a banner year for Williamsburg meals and revenue.
Right, and 20 was not performing bad until COVID hit.
Right, right.
That-
And another thing that I think Dr. Cranbill mentioned was about the businesses and the different grants that have been provided to the businesses. I see Ms. DeWitt here, and I was wondering if she or you or Mr. Trivett could just sort of remind the public of the grants that were provided to the businesses, because I think there was a wide range and pretty substantial amount of money that was provided to help them get through this crisis. I think Michelle probably has them off the top of her head.
Michelle, can you use that microphone? This one seems to be experiencing an issue.
Sorry to everyone in the IT box. Thank you, Mayor and members of council and Councilwoman Ramsey. The COVID relief funds that we've issued to city businesses that have run through the city's Economic Development Authority total $1.3 million.
Okay.
We have also accessed additional funds for them through other sources, through the 30-day fund, raised some local money, which all of you helped support as well. But those are the ones that actually ran through the city and went to about almost 200 city businesses.
And I think in the Economic Development Authority meeting yesterday, it was brought out that additional funds would be forthcoming from the federal government. Is that correct?
Yes. Breaking news, as of Tuesday, we received a letter from the governor's office saying we did so well with some of the CDBG funds we received from the state that we are receiving another $1.2 million to issue to our businesses. We're doing that in conjunction with York County.
And then there's a separate restaurant relief bill. That's a federal program, isn't it?
Yes, there's a restaurant revitalization fund that is a federal program that's open right now. About 16,000 restaurants nationwide have applied, but many more are still applying. There's also a shuttered venue grant at the federal level, which we've helped city businesses apply for. Still in process. That money has not hit the street yet. That's for any venue that sells tickets that was closed due to COVID. So a movie theater, Colonial Williamsburg, a performing arts center, escape room, different things like that. And then we've heard, this has not been passed yet at the federal level, but there will be it looks like there will be a federal hotel relief program that's similar to the restaurant and the venue program.
And in one of our programs, we specifically targeted restaurants and hotels for grant relief to them.
Yes, ma'am.
I forget the total amount that went to them.
Oh, I don't, do you remember, was it 700,000?
I want to say that's about it, but that came through something other than our CARES.
No, that was.
So I have 782. 830 for small business assistance.
And then,
there's
we
been
can
a
get
lot
back
of
to you to
different-
clarify it all. The
that's
first
fine.
round was based on BPOL payments, which is based on businesses' annual receipts. So everyone received based on what they paid in their business license tax, their BPOL tax. The second one that you're referring to was a grant of $5,000 to every restaurant, and then a grant between $5,000 and $15,000 to every hotel, depending on how many hotel rooms they had.
And do you have any feel for the percentage of restaurants and hotels that applied for these grants?
I have that data in my office, but over 50%, well
Okay.
over 50%.
And if I remember correctly, a lot of these grants were without a lot of strings, contrary to, the CARES Act that we did, that your office helped them in many ways to be able to obtain those grants and financial help.
Exactly. In fact, I credit our city attorney. She helped us with language put into all your grant programs that said we would interpret them liberally in favor of the business. And we did that, and it was strictly COVID relief, cash to get them into their hands so they didn't have to report to us afterwards. It was recognized it was COVID relief.
All right, thank you. And the proposal came up to postpone the cigarette tax. So if we have an amount of money that we're budgeting for the cigarette tax based on it going into effect July 1st at the 40-cent rate, is that correct?
That's correct. That is about $38,000 for the year. And the purpose of that was not just the dollars, as much as putting ourselves at the cap that the state would allow before we lose the opportunity to do that. Listening to Ms. Overy, it sounds like if we delayed that, say, to October or some later period, that the savings and being able to use the existing stamps that she has would offset
The increase.
the delay in that revenue.
So we would basically be decreasing the revenue that you had increased before.
Right.
Okay. And Mr. Trivett, when you sent out the letter in March 17th, at that point you were proposing an 8-cent tax increase, and there were a lot of people who responded at that time because it was right in the beginning and you laid everything out. And just to clarify that now we're talking about a 66-cent increase, so it would be 2 cents less than what the letter was that was sent out in March. And would you just remind us a little bit as to why you now feel that a 66 cents will allow us not only to balance the budget, but to take care of the CIP that we all reviewed back in February?
Sure, absolutely. So, the basis of our proposed tax increase is the fact that the CIP has been operating at a loss for years. And the general fund has been supplementing the expenses of that capital plan. And it's not sustainable. And we've been talking about that for years with the City Council at the financial retreat. We've been planning for a tax increase to address that deficiency. And unfortunately, what COVID-19 has done is made that increase urgent. As you all know, you've seen it in our budget presentations. Ms. Dammer did a good job talking about it earlier today. We are running a deficit. The budget's running a deficit. It has now for the last 2 years. And the deficit that we're running continues to grow. Even in the proposed budget, there is a deficit that's made up by taking money out of a reserve fund that is intended for emergency use. And Mr. Overy's right. That's exactly what its purpose is. But you have to replenish it at some point. It's just like a savings account. You can't spend it down to nothing and then go on and hope that the next emergency doesn't come, because it's certainly looming. We've seen that already in the gas shortage. So that's the basis for the increase. The reason that we are able to reduce what I had advertised as 68 cents to 66 cents is because a very small portion of the tax increase was designed to recover the lost funds from the reserve and do that gradually over time. And so when it was announced that the ARP, the American Recovery Plan, would include funds that would come to localities, we saw the opportunity to recover some of those expenses in the reserve, which would negate the need to do that replenishment even as slowly as we had planned. So what really transpired that changed our outlook was the fact that the American Recovery Plan estimate went from $2.9 million to $13.5 million. And with that amount of money, we can nearly make up what the reserve will have paid out over time, as well as normalize the loss of revenue in the coming year's budget. And that's what makes the 66-cent tax increase possible. I get that it's very hard to understand that relationship, given the enormity of $13.5 million. And Mr. Maslin's right. If you compare that directly to the revenue that's generated by the proposed tax increase, it is approximately 10 years worth of revenue. That's true. But you've also got to look at the fact that your professional staff is charged with looking at the fiscal health, not just in next year, but in the future years, and preparing this council and the city for the expenses that are on the horizon, expenses that we know are not going to just disappear. They're going to continue to be there. We've also showed you that over the last few years, to balance the budget, we have reduced expenses, particularly in the CIP, by nearly $2 million at this point. And that includes eliminating projects and pushing projects out. Again, those expenses do not go away. They're still needed. And we can talk about some of the ones that are easy to talk about, a fishing dock, sidewalks, those kinds of things. But what we're not talking about are the requests by the departments, particularly like the police department, who's requested improvements to the firing range, needed training, additional equipment. Those are other examples of projects that have been delayed, pushed out, or eliminated. So I think that we need not to lose focus on the fact that what we're talking about is the future fiscal health of the city. It is true, absolutely. I can balance the budget next year without a tax increase at all. The way that I would do that is to reduce expenses, as I've showed you, and also continue to use money from the reserve. Those are the only two ways to do that. It's impossible to do it any other way. So what you're really saying is, are you fundamentally okay with a reserve that is less than your policy, below 35%, without some vehicle to replenish it? That's the situation you would be in if you do not enact a tax increase of some kind. 64 cents is a rate that allows us to move ahead through next year. I anticipate that it's impossible that we won't have to have another tax rate increase in the following year, unless you decide to lower your policy for the reserve, which would absolutely not be my recommendation.
Thank you. And speaking of the reserve, obviously we have dipped into it during this time of COVID, and the expectation as people come back to town and everything's hunky-dory that we'll be able to replenish that. But there's no guarantee that COVID might rear its head again next year or in 2023, so that we would have a less healthy reserve to draw on when the next emergency comes. And to Dr. Cranbill's point, I think he said that he doesn't want the city to run a deficit, and if projections come in higher, then we're able to address the deficit that we're currently running, as opposed to sort of betting on the come. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the CIP. I think that it's a little short-sighted to focus on a fishing dock and a basketball court without looking at the full list of CIP projects and how they impact the entire community. Just thinking of one project that I think was delayed from last year was the demolition of the DMV Center. And to me, that ties directly to an economic opportunity for the city. The longer that is sitting there, the harder it is for someone to envision. I think everyone wants site-ready locations for when they come in. And I think Mr. Rogers brought up some good points on Monday when we talked about the CIP and its impact, and not just, you know, what may be wants to some people actually relate to needs to others. And it was brought up too about other communities not having a tax increase, and in particular, I read an article about Virginia Beach, and they did not have a tax increase this year, but they had one key word in there that they had stabilized their budget. And so I think things that Virginia Beach and some of these others have been able to do through other revenue sources has not been available to Williamsburg. And Virginia Beach was offering a pay increase to their employees. So I am in favor of the city manager's 66 cents budget. I am also prepared to vote on it today. I do not think that waiting another month will give us enough information. And what if the revenue projections go down in May? We can't delay the budget till July, hoping that in June things might go back up again. So that's all I have to say.
Rogers?
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I recognize for those of you who provided public comment, it must be very difficult to leave your jobs to come and provide comment in front of us. I got the good advice in joining council more recently than some who never go into a meeting knowing exactly how you're going to vote and to try to listen to people who have shown to provide public comment and taken times out of their day. I think a lot of the points made today have been very good on the necessity and all the time that staff has put into looking into this budget and the necessity to correct the structural imbalance that we're seeing right now. But I have been swayed in folks who have come and provided support for honoring what we originally said in pushing off the budgetary vote until June, which was our original, at least after firstly deciding May, our original intent to give people a little bit more time to come and provide public comment now that they are feeling a little bit more safe to do so. The reasons there being it would be helpful to know a little bit more about some of the revenues from personal property taxes that we may see from our commissioner. It would also be good to know for sure what some of the revenues from the American Rescue Plan, the ARP, will be. And whereas we know most likely what we will be receiving right now, I've heard the date of potentially May 17th being when there will be more of a sure thing in what we would receive through this rescue plan. And so it would be good to know exactly what those could be before going officially ahead with the budget. And finally, the point was made that at one point we said it would be in June, and that was to allow people to provide more public comment. And for some, that has still been the case. They still believe that June is when council will go ahead with this vote. And I know that for city staff, it has always been the intention to be as upfront about this process as we can be. I think if that is still our intention, even if it has been on people to be mindful of this process and to come and provide public comment during this process, we should honor what we said in moving the vote to June. That being said, what we are deciding is obviously something during a very difficult time, and it's been brought up that there is a support from council that the original budgetary, there is a support to go through a 4-cent raise to 64 cents on our assessed value, and then there's a separate faction of thought that says 66 cents. The difference between those is more minimal for people, and so it's not necessarily a contention of do we raise or do we lower, but more what is the necessity to keep our city healthy right now to be able to more quickly replenish the reserves. And I think that is still a very important thing that we're considering. Secondly, the point to what will we use in the creation or the refurbishing of capital improvement projects. I think it's easy to say basketball courts and a fishing dock doesn't seem like necessities, but I brought up the point on Monday that those plus the lights in the Prince George parking garage, these are things that we are counting on to continue people wanting to travel to Williamsburg so that they can be on the fishing pier, whereas next year it would have to be closed if we were not to go ahead and repair it or to actually park in the Prince George parking garage. And finally, I think the replenishment of our reserves is a very important thing to do. Obviously, as Mr. Overy brought up, that's a rainy day fund, something that we pull from in times of need. But as was happening more recently with the Colonial Pipeline snafu, going towards the summer with a potential hurricane season, we will need a healthy reserve to be able to pull from in times of need. And so a policy that would be able to more quickly replenish that, I still think is a good one. But ultimately, I appreciate people who have come today and who have made very valid points as to we should honor what we said at one point of pushing off the decision, as we originally stated, to June, so as to allow as many people who want and who may still believe that the vote is then to come and provide public comment in front of us. That's all.
Well, good, thank you. Well, I appreciate everyone's comments. All of you make great points. But for me, the proposed tax increase is not to support frivolous activities on behalf of the city. We do not have an inflated, overstaffed government that is buying $500 hammers and $1,000 toilet seats. That's not what's happening here, and that's not what we're supporting. And I think my colleagues certainly enumerated the value of protecting our reserve funds, so that we do have that rainy day policy, the value of having a healthy CIP and funding it accordingly is absolutely imperative to the future of Williamsburg, as I said earlier, to maintain the quality of life, the quality of services that we have here in the city. They could be better, but I think the staff strives to make the best at what we have today, and they're doing an excellent job. And so I see that a tax increase is going to be necessary. It's not the opportune time. I've been in business my entire life and as an entrepreneur, and it hurts when taxes get increased. But I see the benefit, as particularly from a tourism perspective, of making sure that our city maintains the aesthetic values that we see out there. But beyond that, what our residents get every day from our city staff is vitally important to making sure that our neighborhoods stay healthy and vibrant. So I hear, I think, a general consensus that we should hold off till June. I don't think that there's going to be any challenge with doing that. There's some benefit to it, as has been communicated by my colleagues here, that if nothing else, it'll afford the opportunity for maybe a few more folks to come forward on either side of the decision. And I look forward to hearing from them. Maybe by June, we'll have some additional guidance from the ARP, American Relief Recovery Plan. But that said, that money is not, what's needed to protect and shore up our CIP, into the future. So there's two different elements there, but we can continue that conversation. I know that if we don't pass the budget today, we have to talk about a resolution because the school system that we're partners with James City County, has a state mandate that requires a commitment of funding. Absent an approved budget, we have to approve a resolution to show the school that we will continue to support that budget.
Right, so what we need to do, just from sort of an organizational standpoint, is we would ask you to table item A, item B, and item under unfinished business, and then item B under new business as well. So if you'll take that vote first, and I'll sort of walk us through the approval of the resolution that's required.
So under item 6, both A and B, and then under item 7, item B,
That's right.
deferred till June.
That's right.
One of my colleagues, please make a motion.
So we're tabling A and B?
So
Would you like some help with the language?
Yes.
I move to table Resolution 2107, 2108, and Ordinance Number 2103 until the June 2021 business meeting. That's the language of the motion.
I couldn't hear.
You can just say so moved, if you're so inclined.
Oh, I couldn't hear.
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, so our next action, Mr. Mayor, would be to add proposed resolution 2111 to the agenda, and that is a resolution approving the City of Williamsburg's share of funding for the Williamsburg-James City County School Board budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. After you've added it to the agenda and before you act on it, I will read it in its entirety.
Okay. So we'll make that item G under new business, or would you like to do that first? Difference?
I would go ahead and do it now so that it's done.
So we'll move on to new business, and the first item is going to be the resolution for school, which is resolution number 21-11.
That's right.
So, Mr. Trivett, would you read that resolution?
Well, let's add it to the agenda first, if you could take a vote on adding it to the agenda. So the motion would be, someone would need to move that we add to the agenda proposed resolution 2111, a resolution approving the city of Williamsburg share of funding for the Williamsburg James City County School Board budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. And you can say so moved if you are so inclined.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so now that that's been added to the agenda, we can act on it. So if you don't mind, Mayor, I'll just read it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the title again is a resolution approving the city of Williamsburg's share of funding for the Williamsburg James City County School Board budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. Whereas the Williamsburg James City County School Board presented to the Williamsburg City Council its estimate of the amount of money needed for the support of the public schools during fiscal year 2022, the city's share of support based on the joint contract between the city of Williamsburg and James City County is 9.68% for fiscal year 2022. And whereas the city shall contribute $9,214,181 for school operations and up to $828,453 to fund the school's capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2022. And whereas a synopsis of the proposed City of Williamsburg's budget for fiscal year 2022, which included funding for the Williamsburg James City County Schools, was duly published, and after public notice, duly given, a public hearing with respect thereto has been conducted by the City Council. After due public notice thereof, and upon consideration of which it is now necessary and desirable to approve the same as prescribed by law, and whereas City Council delayed the adoption of the budget to June, but that funding pertaining to the schools is required to be approved before June. And there's only 22 more pages. I'm just kidding. The next page is the last. And now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Williamsburg, Virginia, that pursuant to section 22.1-93 of the Code of Virginia, 1950 as amended, the City of Williamsburg's share of funding for the Williamsburg James City County Schools for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022 of $9,214,181 for school operations and $828,453 for capital improvements is hereby approved. Adopted May the 13th, 2021.
Okay, so just to be clear, because we're not adopting the budget today, we are not satisfying the law that governs the school adopting their budget. And so by adopting this resolution, we are committing these funds out of whatever the budget's approved in June.
That's right. You're committing to the proposed budget from the Williamsburg James City County School System.
Mr. Vice Mayor, do you have any questions or thoughts? We'll go around the table.
Nope.
I do not either.
Okay.
So the proposed motion could be to adopt resolution number 21-11 as drafted.
Somebody like to make that motion?
I will propose to adopt motion 2111 as drafted.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so now it takes us, we'll continue on in new business, and the first one is consideration and adoption of Resolution 21-09, amending the general fund, tourism fund, and capital improvement program budgets for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021.
Yes, and I have basically 4 requests in Resolution 21-09. The first one is asking to increase the transfer from the tourism fund to the general fund to cover any revenue deficit or deficit of the budget. If you'll recall, when we were preparing the FY21 budget, we also anticipated that in FY20 we would draw about $2.2 million from fund balance or from the tourism fund to cover the reserve. We did not need to do that, even though we drew down close to $600,000 from unassigned fund balance. We were able to maintain our policy level. However, we do believe that we will need more than the $1,598,000 that was budgeted in FY '21. My earlier projections would have estimated about $3.1 million being drawn from tourism. I now think that we'll need 2.6 in conjunction with the draw from the CIP contingency reserve we created. So I'm asking to increase that by 1.5 million. We will only transfer what we actually need at the end of the year, but I want to have the authority to do that because by the time I get to the point that I know what will be required, I will not have time to come back and ask for that authorization. Also, I'm asking to transfer from tourism to the CIP fund $165,000 to support the public art program. I'm also asking for a $250,000 authorization for the sports complex that was part of their award back in '19. It was not clearly defined in the budget appropriation for FY '21, and so this is really a corrective action. And then I'm also asking to pull from the tourism reserve funds that were discussed earlier in the year for tourism resiliency, and that was $69,177 to support the purchase of the portable stage, $44,000 for plant barricades that help create additional outdoor eating dining space, $8,000 for a targeted industry study, and another $1,300, just close to that, for the Dog Street public seating.
So Mayor, just to be clear, these are all things that you have already adopted in terms of policy. So this is really just about taking the financial step to confirm payment for those things.
Vice Mayor, any questions?
One question. Just for clarity on the $165,000, this is a two-step process. You're moving the budget, but there's a decision-making as to whether we use that entire budget in a particular year, right?
Well, actually, you've already made that decision. You set in your policy how the Arts Council can access it, and they, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. DeWitt can correct me, they're not allowed to access more than 10% in any given year without coming back to council for approval. So you're transferring the money into the CIP so that they have access to it, but they have to stay within your spending guidelines.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
No questions, comments?
So more or less just housekeeping.
It's housekeeping.
Build what we've already committed to. So is there a motion?
So I move that City Council adopt Resolution 21-09, approving the transfer of funds from the Tourism Fund to the General Fund, appropriating tourism resiliency projects, the transfer of funds from the Tourism Fund to the Capital Improvement Fund for the appropriation of the Public Arts Program, and the appropriation for the Sports Facility Complex funding.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
So that takes us to item C on our new business, rather. A consideration and adoption of Resolution 21-10, amending the general fund budgets for the City of Williamsburg, Virginia for the fiscal year ending June 30th. Sorry, just read that one. So,
I think that's right.
yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Yep.
Mayor, I guess I can speak to this one. This is, again, sort of a housekeeping issue. We have a contract with the school system that requires us to transfer the money that we receive for sales tax for education to them. In some years, it's more than we have budgeted. In some years, it's less than we have budgeted. And every year, we decide how to handle that overage or deficit. This year, what we're asking you to do is transfer the overage, which is substantial. I believe it's just over $600,000 to the school system in satisfaction of the contract.
And just to clarify, what we're really asking for here is somewhat of a flexible budget. So what we're requesting is that I would increase the appropriation for the revenue to the exact amount we receive from the state for sales tax for education, and then appropriate the expenditure that allows me to transfer it to the school system by a like amount. So when I was writing the resolution and memo, the estimate was that it was going to increase from $842,000 to $1,450,000. And then yesterday I got an email saying that they had increased that estimate to $1,556,000. So this allows us the flexibility of whatever we receive in sales tax for education will be passed through to the school system.
Okay. And so I hear what you're saying, you're needing the flexibility, and that's based on the information that you're getting from the school system, because
Well, based on what we actually receive from the state.
It's very similar to the last item. We're asking for you to allow us to go ahead and approve now the transfer of whatever we receive, so that we don't have to come back to you again.
Okay, fair enough. Just so that everybody understands that there's not fungibility in this, that there's extra money that be left on the table.
Right.
So in this approved variant amount, there will be an exact amount, and that's the number we will adhere to.
That's right.
Right.
Any other questions or comments?
Drew, could you just remind everybody, is it next year that the funds
Yes.
will go directly from the state? We won't even have to go through our
Right.
books,
This is the last year of wrestling with this problem, because next year the funds will not pass through the city. They'll go directly to the school district.
Thank you.
And that's what I was going to bring up, because it's important, I think, for people to realize this is just a pass-through, and so next year it'll just pass through directly from the state to the schools without stopping here.
Right, right, that's right.
Buck stops there.
Right.
None for me. You all covered.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
So I move that City Council approve Resolution 21-10 as submitted.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
So that takes us to item D on the agenda, consideration and approval of a parking lease agreement with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation.
Yes, Mayor. So this is an agenda item long time coming. We're pretty excited about the opportunity that it brings. In 2016, we did a parking study with Walker Consultants, and one of the recommendations that study was that we try to consolidate the parking experience downtown under one umbrella, meaning operations and management, so that the user really felt like it was all the same regardless of who owned the lot. So that meant that the city council, the city of Williamsburg, needed to try and find a way to take over management and operation of the Colonial Williamsburg surface lots. And so we have been working on that now for many years. And we have finally a lease on the agenda for approval that allows us to do that. So this lease essentially allows us to take over lots P2, P3, P4, P5, and P6 downtown in terms of operation and management.
Includes P3, just to clarify.
Oh, sorry, P3. So that's the history behind it. I think there was a 2017 implementation plan that staff presented that also recommended this. As you all know, we've been working hard on additional parking changes. This is one step in that direction.
So the lease document itself, the city leases from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation all the parking lots except for P3 for $1 a year. What's different about this agreement is that those are now paid lots, not free lots, and so there needed to be a management component to that. And so for purposes of these lots, the city is going to act as the agent for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation in collecting those fees, and the city will retain a fee for doing that of either 20% or $20,000, whichever is less. This agreement is a pilot program because we don't know what the costs are going to be for managing all of those additional spaces from what we're doing right now. And so this year gives us an opportunity to figure out what those costs are, and then next year we would draft an agreement with the foundation that was for a longer period of time with a more realistic expectation of the costs, or at least with data behind that number. What this does additionally is allow us to enforce parking in those lots, which we've been able to do for years under the 1962 lease agreement that now no longer exists. And so this restores the city's ability to do that enforcement.
Thank you. So this has, as City Manager Trivett says, has been a long time coming. I think it, from a perception standpoint, everybody thinks they are municipal parking lots and generally hold us accountable for what happens in those lots. I think it's at CW's expense, Colonial Williamsburg's expense, they have done some significant renovations on these parking lots. One is ongoing now, and they have decided to have them paid parking, and having a unified force that enforces the parking regulations in towing and collecting fees makes perfect sense for the overall community, but moreover, it makes perfect sense for the consumer. So I think this is something that it's a big step forward, and I appreciate all the efforts that's gone into negotiating this. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree that a lot of, when you talk to the community, a lot of it is confusing about who's responsible for those lots. I really only had one question, and Mr. Trivett, or maybe Chief Dunn can answer this. Do you see in the future that this is going to create a need for additional staffing to monitor?
I don't think that this lease will do that. I think as we talk about changing how we handle parking generally, that might, but it will be, any increases in staffing would be included in revenue estimates, so offset by what we might take in from paid parking.
Okay, thanks.
Two things. Number one, I think we've talked about, at least internally, that once this gets approved, there'll be joint communication among the city and Colonial Williamsburg Foundation to the public, explaining what's going on, to sort of simplify what's going on with the rates, who's doing what, because there's a lot of confusion out there right now. I thought I read somewhere in language that was a little awkward. It said in terms of determining what the parking fees would be, that the city and the foundation would cooperate, and then one would notify each other. Don't we just want to say that any changes to the parking fees need agreement between both parties?
The language is awkward intentionally. It needs to be a conversation between the two parties. We are trying to forward a larger strategy, and the foundation is interested in setting their own rates. And so there needs to be cooperation in setting the rates for the city fees in Colonial Williamsburg, but they want to maintain some control over that.
We certainly want them to match. I think right now we are benefiting from an excellent relationship with the foundation, and so I don't anticipate this language to be a problem. In fact, I've already talked to the president about what we think we need to do in terms of matching rates, and it seems like we're on the same page. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. My suggestion would be, let's adopt this resolution in its form this year. It's a pilot program, as Ms. Shelton said, and then if we need to change how that structure and that relationship exists for next year, we can. Because as you know, we are looking at other options in terms of both software and technology.
No, that's a good clarification. I was thinking it pertained to establishing the rates on the lots as opposed to our garage. But
sure.
So are we saying that basically right now we're establishing the rate for the parking structure, CW establishes the rate for the parking lots?
That's true right now.
And you have that conversation.
And what the lease says is that in the future, after the lease is approved, we will work together so that there's some coordination on that.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
And just to follow up with Mr. Maslins, I think that information and policy will be greatly appreciated by the public, so that that we are all sort of on the same page. And just a couple questions. I noticed in reading that it allows for the parking lots to be used for temporary non-parking uses, such as the farmer's market and holiday market and things like that. It didn't specify a time limit, so is that something that would just sort of be figured out from conversation based on the permit request of the entity? I mean, is that fluid?
So you're asking about how long I can issue a permit to use one of the lots?
Right, so there wasn't, so I assume that that's very flexible based
Yes.
on the permit request that comes in.
Yeah, basically, we have a noticing provision. We both have a noticing provision. If they decide to close the lot for one of their uses, they have a certain period of time they have to tell us in advance, and the same thing by us.
So for instance, the farmer's market is currently in P6, and so I assume that that request was made for the entirety of the farmer's market season.
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah. And why was P3 excluded? Do we know?
They were not interested in including P3 in this agreement.
Okay. And P2, P4, and P6 are currently paid, and P5 is included in the agreement and is currently non-paid. And when we incorporated, I think when you revised the budget and revenue, you included, what was it, $450,000 for parking revenue?
That's right.
So that was sort of looking at the big picture, taking these into account, plus the garage, plus any additional paid.
Well, that was really just the $450,000 that we adjusted the budget by was really just considering changing the rate and the payment structure in the garage to match the Colonial Williamsburg rate.
Okay,
That's it. The $20,000 payment in this lease is in addition to that.
okay. And those were my only questions. Thank you.
Some confusion was mentioned earlier, so I want to take this point to remind the public that when this is put into account, it will be the case that someone would have 2 free hours in a parking lot, and then going forward, every hour after that would be a cost of $2, correct?
That's how it works now in the Colonial Williamsburg lot? Yes.
Right, right. And so I just want to make sure that folks know that. I know that I've gotten some comments saying that people don't want to pay to eat a burger, but you should be able to if you're able to keep that within 2 hours. My question was on the year agreement that we have with them, the 20% or 20,000. For the monitoring of these parking lots, that does seem rather small, so I imagine it'll be a significant renegotiation when that time does come into a new contract. What do you think that may take a look? What do you think that may look like when we are able to renegotiate it? And some of the look that you all did in other localities is how they do a joint parking management.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in my experience, this is how it works. A private lot that wants a city to do enforcement pays for the privilege of that enforcement, often through shared revenue. My expectation is that actually, I don't know that I would characterize the potential increase next year as being a significant change, because the software and technology that we hope to deploy makes that enforcement very easy. Even now, as it currently stands, we use license plate readers through Passport to do sort of a drive-through patrol. So the days of marking every individual tire and it being very time-consuming for an enforcement officer are behind us. So even now, it's a very efficient process. So I don't expect there to be a gigantic change in what we're charging. I think one of the unknowns is just how aggressive Colonial Williamsburg will ask us to be in enforcing the rules. Because there's sort of a sweet spot in there, and especially in a tourist economy, of not being overly aggressive with your enforcement. We've got to be aggressive enough to get the turnover that's desired, but not so aggressive that it's burdensome.
Right. Well, I look forward to the unanimous monitoring program, and when I think we take this vote, the joint statement that will come out letting people know the new system implemented citywide. That's all.
Thank you.
So if we're ready for a motion, I move that City Council authorize the city manager to execute the lease for surface parking and limited agent agreement with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so that, thank you, everyone. So that takes us to resolution number 21-06, recommendations and appointments to boards of commission, Board of Equalization.
So City Council does this every year. The court appoints the members of the Board of Equalization, but City Council gets to make a recommendation to the court. This year we have 3 members whose terms are expiring on June 30. Jack Marsden, Sharon Baker, and Mr. Glazner, and all 3 have agreed and would like to serve for another 3-year term. And so if that's City Council's recommendation, if City Council can adopt Resolution 2106, then we'll file that along with the petition for the court to make that appointment.
Good. So as the attorney said, we don't make this appointment, but we make a recommendation. So I think we've discussed these names. No conversation. Is there a motion?
So I move that City Council adopt Resolution 21-06.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so that takes us to item F, consideration and approval of appointments to boards and commissions. Sandy's name's on the agenda, but I think Vice Mayor probably has a motion.
Yes. I move that City Council appoint Sarah Balacio to a one-year term to expire June 30, 2022, and Robert Curry to a two-year term to expire June 30, 2023, to the Williamsburg Public Arts Council. City Council appointees are Barbara Ramsey and Pat Dent. The following have been appointed by their respective boards and commissions: Economic Development Authority, Harold Phillipson; Planning Commission, Elaine Macbeth; Tourism Development Grant Review Committee, Chris Carassi; Architectural Review Board, Scott Spence; and Williamsburg Area Arts Commission, Pat Rublin.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so that takes us to item 8 on the agenda, which is our open forum, which again is another opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak. Seeing no one, I'll close the open forum and move us next to adjournment.
So I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
We are adjourned.